wonderful World Veg Fest today, having some good food and wonderful time. I am so excited to introduce Katie May. I was lucky enough to see her presentation in Sonoma County, and she makes the most delicious, healthy foods that are easy to make. So I just want to say, Katie May has a Master's of Science in Nutrition from Bastyr University. She's very passionate about empowering people to feel their best physically, emotionally, and mentally through delicious plant-based foods. And she's the culinary coach and founder of Plants Street Culinary Gym, based in Santa Rosa, and provides both in-person and online training to make plant-based cooking easy and delicious and nutritious. So let's give her a big hand.
Thank you. I am so excited to talk about this topic specifically. I've really been passionate about making a plant-based diet flavorful from the start. How many people are eating plant-based? Great. How many people would just say they're vegan or vegetarian maybe and interested in eating more whole foods? Right, great. Okay, so eating plant-based, how satisfied are you with the flavor and variety of your food? Really good? Great, great. Oh, good. Yeah, don't sneak out of here without catching my new website is theculinarygym.com. So I've totally dropped the Plant Street name. The Culinary Gym is going to be a new take on what I'm doing. Okay, so why I'm so interested in flavor. I started this in 2010, before Forks Over Knives came out, before it got big and went mainstream, and before there were a lot of plant-based cookbooks. Now it's really, it's not too hard to find really delicious plant-based recipes. But starting off, it wasn't that way. And I didn't go to culinary school. I taught myself, just being in the kitchen and testing and everything. But I made the food really flavorful, and that's, a lot of people knew me. I have a little niche, and I'm not very outgoing, so I didn't grow very much. But the people who were tasting my recipes said they were better than most other plant-based people. And I didn't know why until someone asked me to coach them about umami. And I knew umami was a taste, but it's once I got into the research behind it and I realized, oh my God, my food is so rich in umami, which is why it tastes so good compared to a lot of the other plant-based blogs that were starting off. And that's a little bit different, it's grown. But so I'm going to tell you why it's so good for us and why it matters for our health and our well-being, okay? So let's go to the next slide. We're going to go from talking about umami and the flavor and how it can impact our health, okay? Umami is one of the 5 tastes, but we rarely talk about it. No one really knows what it is. It's so exotic. And there's reason for that. Next slide. Some of my food, some of my favorite, that carrot lox. Oh my God, to die for. So next slide. All of the food, the pictures I'm showing you are specifically dishes that are rich in umami. So what is flavor? It's a combination of taste plus the aroma plus the mouthfeel. So it's a lot more than just your taste. Okay. Next slide. This I could talk for an hour, but I have 50 slides, so we got to go kind of fast. So this is what a taste bud actually is. There's 5 tastes, right? And they come in different shapes, actually. And they hit your taste receptor, and that's what signals you to actually sense something. Next slide. It was actually Democritus in 400 BC that discovered those 4 tastes, the 4 basic tastes. And he said that they're based on shapes, which to me is, I have no idea how he came across that. Like he said, they're little tiny pieces and they fit inside your tongue. But that stood the test of time because Aristotle believed it, everyone else believed it, even when the Indians said that astringent and spicy were also taste. We said, no way, there's only 4, okay? Fast forward, next slide. Sorry. So there's 4 tastes, and we actually need them from an evolutionary standpoint. Why did we develop these tastes? Not the term, but the actual physical being. Why are we attracted to these tastes?
Tell you what to eat. eat and what's got more sugar, what's
Yes.
perhaps not.
So let's go to the next slide. Sweet foods tell us there's glucose, there's energy there. So we're drawn to that. And notice there's a specific stimuli, it's sucrose. There's different ones, there's a lot of different ones now, but sucrose is one of the main ones that telling us there's sweetness. Next slide. Salt tells us there's enough sodium and minerals in the food. So we're really drawn to salty food, and we can get that from the whole foods. We don't need to be adding it to our food. Next slide. Sour. What sour tell us? That something is unripe, we shouldn't be eating it yet, or it's gone bad, it's spoiled. Next slide. Bitter tells us something's poisonous. So we don't want it. It's not until we tell ourselves and get the intelligence, the wisdom, that a lot of those bitter foods are actually really healthy for us. Interesting enough, those most bitter foods that are healthy for us are detoxing our body. So it's either toxic or helping to detox. Next slide. So what's this fifth taste I was talking about? Well, it wasn't until the late 1800s, seriously, we went back 400 BC to 400 BC for the first foretaste. It wasn't until like 1890 that a chef said his soup, his veal stock that he made, amazing flavor, like out of this world, everyone was talking about it. It was not one of those foretastes. So now, next slide. It wasn't until Japanese scientists also identified this, different taste, and it was in Japan. Dr. Ikeda, he broke it down from his dashi, his soup. He broke down the kombu and realized that it was actually a compound called glutamate. Glutamate was what signaled that umami taste, and he named it umami, which means deliciousness, savory deliciousness. So next slide. The umami, it tells us there's enough protein, or it tells us there's protein in the food, which to me, when we're in having this conversation with the plant-based community where protein doesn't matter, because we don't need to worry about getting enough protein because it's in all the vegetables, and yet it is so important for our taste buds, for us to like the food. We want that umami, and we don't need a burger to get it. It's in all organic plants, organic matter. It's in living things. Next slide. So what is umami? Really, what's it taste like? I didn't make up that picture. I just found it, but that's really what it is. I think of it as when you bite into something and you get that feeling like it's orgasmic, like, oh my God. You don't want that bite to end before the dish is finished, you just want more. You're gonna want more. So next slide. So being that good, Dr. Ikeda knew that he could make a lot of money off this. And so he packaged it as MSG, or the brand is Ajinomoto. Yeah, so that's where MSG comes from. And we Europe, he's over in Japan. It went through Asia, but getting to Europe, they kind of rejected it. But it finally made it to the States, and you saw it in a lot of the Asian cuisine in the restaurants, right? Well, it wasn't until someone complained and were getting headaches and everything, and that person wrote to a journal, not intending it to go into the journal, but it did, and then everyone knew about it. So they got a lot of bad rep. And for a long time, umami and MSG were the same thing in our minds, or the people that knew about it was the same thing. But let's go to the next slide. MSG, this is salt. I just want to show you. Monosodium glutamate has sodium in it, but it's much less than salt. Okay, that's just a side note, because people are using MSG now. A lot of chefs are using MSG like we use salt and pepper. It's a third spice in the kitchens. That's how amazing it is for improving the flavor of our dishes. So in a sense, it is actually healthier than salt. And it actually improves the flavor more, so you need to use less of it. But that's not reason we should be using it. Next slide. So MSG, wasn't sure about this next slide yet. I want to say MSG is like, if you didn't catch the line I said, it's like the white sugar. It's like cane sugar to sugar. Okay, so MSG is less highly refined. How many people are sensitive to sugar? They get, whatever happens. I end up crying. If I have a lot of sugar, if I have some vegan ice cream, I'm in tears that night. Like, that's how sensitive I am. So some people are that sensitive. They say about 30% of the population is that sensitive to MSG. Okay, so it's not a problem for everyone, but for some people it is. And if you do large amounts, it definitely is because of the way it affects our body in other ways we're going to talk about. But the actual glutamate is the most prevalent neurotransmitter in our body and one of the most prevalent amino acids in our body. It's an amino acid, but it's not an essential amino acid, so our body can make it. But we need it for everything, for our memory, we build muscles with it, and there's actually, glutamate is an amino acid, and if you take off one of the hydrogens, it becomes glutamic acid. Okay, so those two terms are pretty much the same compound. They just kind of get converted one to the other, and our body does that really well. There's another similar compound called glutamine, and that is very important for building muscle. And these compounds, I just want to go, I just want to like dive into this so much. This is going to be another talk. I'm going to have to do a whole presentation on it. But when we get stressed, our body uses these. It uses them up. Although we can create them, our body uses it up, so it's more important to take it in. So getting umami-rich foods is really important when we're stressed. It will help with our stress. Okay? Next slide. So we've been known about the amazing flavor of umami for centuries. All over the world we have umami-rich foods. We just didn't know what it was called. We didn't have a name for it. The foods that are green, the coloring green, they're based on legumes, mostly legumes. The ones in red are animal products, and the ones in blue are seafood based. But there's all over the world. The one food in America, any guesses? If you can read it? Ketchup! That's why we love ketchup so much. Next slide. So more food. So it wasn't until 1982 that Tokyo opened an Umami Information Center to really help educate the world about how important this was, because America still rejected it until 2002 when a team of researchers in Miami identified taste receptors for umami. Because in order for something to be a taste, we need a taste receptor. So they actually identified that we do have taste receptors for umami. And so finally we started accepting it and people started talking about it. In 2011, I think, one of the big chefs, like celebrity chefs on Chopped or something, they mentioned something about umami, and all the other chefs were like, had no idea what it was. That's how new it is. And then you saw on Twitter, everyone was talking about it. What's this umami and everything? So it really is new. And they're actually starting to package, you see some of those items. There is a vegetarian, if you look up taste number 5, there is a vegetarian one, which is really great. It's a way to get more of the whole food sourced umami rather than MSG. But this is a European company, so I don't think they ship yet to America. Next slide. So I mentioned the glutamate is the #1 source for umami. And glutamic, just checking the time. Glutamic acid is the bound form. No, the glutamic acid is the free form. Glutamate is bound up. Okay, so when it's bound, you're not getting the flavor. You don't taste it. Okay, so whether it's glutamate, glutamic acid, or glutamine, they're all really good for us. But you're not getting that umami taste unless it's in its free form. And that is, when it's in its free form, basal umami is just your basic umami that's coming in that you're sensing, okay? But if you have it in these other two forms, the nucleotides. It's actually in our DNA. This umami flavor is in our DNA. Like if you tasted your DNA, it would taste amazing. So inositol and guanylate are two of the nucleotides in our DNA, and those contribute umami flavor. So when we're eating plants, or when someone might be eating animals, they're getting the DNA from the plants and animals. And that umami source is synergistic with the basal umami source. So it not just adds to it, it multiplies it exponentially. You get more umami, okay? And then there's some other sources, but we don't really know, when you're eating food, you're not going to know where it's coming from. But that's just something to consider, because I think a lot more science will be done on this in the future. I'm going to show you just a tip of the iceberg on that. Next slide. So we do have 5 basic tastes. Now, the main reason I say that we can improve our vitality by knowing how to cook with umami is because it is one of the best flavors, and especially when we're doing savory food and not getting into all the sweets and everything. If we can maximize that, we can make our food taste better. We don't need to eat out to enjoy our food. We don't need to go to animal products, to bread and cheese and wine and all these things that we really might have loved before going plant-based, and now you can still think about them and know that they taste good, but you have a different feeling around it, or you're in transition to that. If you make your food taste good, it'll be easy to stick with this, and a lot of people are already experiencing that. But if you can add in more variety and more flavor, so it's, oh my God, delicious, right? Oh my gosh, and you can share that with other people. So maybe you're on the bandwagon, but your food is not quite appealing to your spouse or your kids, right? If we can make it really flavorful, especially for if you're in the field, maybe you're a cook, maybe you're, I don't know, even elderly homes. We need to make our food taste better to keep our elderly alive. Otherwise, they're just sent to those homes to die. I mean, they're feeding them, literally killing them. Same with our schools. I mean, opposite end of the spectrum, even a bigger problem. So we need to know how to flavor the plants well. And if you go and grab, in 2010, if you grabbed a vegan cookbook, okay, a vegan cookbook might have been pretty junk foody, but if you grabbed a whole food cookbook, whether it was vegan or plant-based, whatever, it was like Forks Over Knives in 2012 when they first came out. It was salads. It was a lot of rice and beans and salads, and not a lot of layering in the flavor, not a lot of intention to make it taste amazing. And so that didn't keep a lot of people, unless you had the, you were at your wit's end, you had no other option for your health. So next slide. Not only is it helping us be more plant-based, but it actually helps to regulate our appetite, and it increases our satiety. When we have more umami in our food, we're more full and satisfied. Okay, so it does the opposite of salt, actually increases your appetite in a bad way. You overeat. But umami is really great for that, and so there's starting to be some research showing that it can be great for weight loss. But if you look at MSG, it's the opposite. MSG will make you gain weight if you're consuming too much of it. Not only because it's so good, it makes you eat more calories. If you control the calories, it still makes people gain weight. So I'm really excited to see more research on this. Next slide. So where do we get umami in the plant kingdom? We're going to go through here really quick because I'm going to give you some good stuff after all this. Next slide. So tomatoes are one of the richest sources. But you see this chart here, it's the green to the red tomato. This is true with all vegetables, with all produce. As it ripens, it increases its umami, okay? And sun-dried tomatoes, the vine ripened, and roasted tomatoes are going to be extra rich in umami, and I'm going to explain why in a little bit. Next slide. Sea vegetables, so that's where Dr. Aikita first noticed the umami. I forgot to change these though. All sea vegetables, except ignore hijiki. Is that how you say that one? That's the one we don't want to be having. It's way too contaminated. So next slide is starchy vegetables. Sweet potatoes are really great, and the squashes, winter squashes. Next slide. Other vegetables. Now here are your other vegetables. Asparagus and peas keep coming up as in my research as being two of the top vegetables. Next slide. We got fats, all roasted nuts. Roasting brings out the umami, but walnuts are the richest source of glutamate. And they can measure the glutamate. It seems to be harder, more difficult to measure the nucleotides. So in the research, if you're looking up like levels of umami in foods, you can find some of the levels, but it may not be, the full effect, that full flavoring.
Roasted?
Yes, roasted, as far as getting the umami. And I only mention olives. I don't really do salt, but if I do olives, I soak them first to reduce the salt content. Next slide. Fermented foods. So any fermented food is going to have more umami. And this is actually why part of the reason meat and cheese is so rich, like the aged cheeses and cured meats, those are going to be the richest sources of animal products. But we don't want to go there. Like I said about the MSG, this being detrimental to our health, the difference in umami levels between plant foods and the animal products is really significant, depending on the number. So it's almost detrimental. I feel like there might be actually detriment of the umami, too much glutamate from the animal products on our health. So that's something that no one's talking about, but I'm really curious about that. Next slide. Oh, wait, go back. Cultured nut cheeses. So that's what makes Miyoko's cheese, or if you have ever fermented your own cheese, that's what makes it so much better than just blending cashews and water. Next slide. Green tea, specifically matcha. I love matcha. Next slide. Spices. Lots of herbs and spices, all add flavor, but these are some of the richest ones in umami. And if you guys get on my email list, I'm going to send out my whole list, this presentation, so you can get the slides. That would be helpful. Next slide. The fungi kingdom too, next. Mushrooms and truffles. Dried mushrooms are best. And shiitakes are really nice. Next slide. And nutritional yeast has lots of umami in it. It also decreases stress. So I watched Dr. Greger's video on the #1 food for stress, like at the perfect time. I was like, I seriously said the day before, Dr. Greger has to know what's the best food for stress. I get it in my email the next day. I was like, yes. The whole video was about nutritional yeast. It was the beta glucans in nutritional yeast, and I really noticed the difference. But knowing that it actually is the glutamate and glutamine help with our stress levels, I wonder if it's working at another level too. Next slide.
Why is Marmite and Vegemite not recommended?
They're just really processed. I mean, nutritional yeast isn't as much, but Marmite and Vegemite are more processed. But yeah. So I mentioned, say cooking is not an incentive. For most people, you don't want to be cooking all day. I love it, but even for me, I don't want to be in the kitchen all the time. Food is a motivation. Of course, we need to eat. We like to eat. And health is a motivation. We want to feel good. But it's the flavor that's going to be the game changer. The flavor is really deciding what you're having day to day and year after year. Next slide. So I want you guys to be in the kitchen experimenting with all my recipes. Next slide. But how can we really maximize that umami? Aside from just knowing those plant foods, how can we increase it more? Next slide. So I mentioned some of these techniques, but the sun ripening and then cooking the umami, because we're talking about releasing that glutamate to its free form, glutamic acid. So if you're simmering or stewing, roasting things, that's really allowing it to cook down. Think of a tempeh. Tempeh's got umami in it when it's just raw or you steam it. But if you let it marinate for an hour, and add some acid to it, like apple cider vinegar, it breaks it down even more, and then it tastes even better. So marinating and fermenting, remember all the kimchi and tempeh and sauerkraut, and dehydrating breaks down the food too. Next slide. So build in the flavor and be intentional about creating it. So I showed you earlier the dried mushrooms. They're the best because they are dried. Even if you rehydrate them, there's still more umami there than a fresh mushroom. Roasted sweet potatoes. Imagine steamed sweet potatoes, fabulous. But roasted sweet potatoes are like candy, right? So that's the same with roasting your nuts. Okay, next slide. It's just to show you too, there is a lot of research that could be done here. This is tomatoes. These are all different types of tomatoes. The red tomato is just the outer part of the tomato. The red line here, orange line. The yellow or cream line is the inner part of the tomato that often people toss, the seeds and some of that flesh. Look at the difference. The cream line is saying that it's that much more umami flavor from the seeds. So if you can just save yourself some time and leave the seeds in, you'll get even more flavor. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things coming about as cooks start to pay attention to these things. Next slide. More umami is not always better. So this is a Reuben. It's hard to tell, but this is one of my recipes for a tempeh Reuben. It's amazing. But there's bread. Surprisingly, bread is not high in umami. I didn't find anything on that. I think it's just rich in the sugars more so. But it has, what's the sauce? Russian dressing yeah. So the dressing and then the tempeh was marinated in some liquid smoke and apple cider vinegar and tamari and lots of flavor there. And then I made kimchi or sauerkraut with beets and put it all together. Amazing, right? So good you could eat 2 of those and you'd be sick. So at True North, I teach at True North Health Center every week, and I don't do bread there. I don't do salt. It's very pure to help people from overeating, mainly. And so I made this dish at True North, and it was just the tempeh with cabbage all stewed together. So it was still increasing the flavor, but you didn't overdo it. And I served it with potato waffles. Next slide. So you don't want to give yourself too much flavor that you can't stop eating. That's the point. 8 things to know when you're cooking with umami. The umami reduces the need for salt. So already a lot of people are trying to reduce their salt, but if you increase the flavor elsewhere, umami being one of them, you don't need the salt as much. Umami harmonizes with the salty and sour, but it is not good with sweetness. So don't try to get umami in your desserts, but go with anything else. Your vegetables, tofu, tempeh, grains, soups, stir fries, casseroles, gravies, even salad. Actually, salad is one of the best places to get it because it's already, more of a blander dish that if you can add umami to it in some way. That's why I love hot cold salads. Get some roasted vegetables in there or some really good yummy beans. Add umami boosters. I'm going to talk about boosters at any time in the cooking process, like you would salt, okay? And the umami boosters are really concentrated, so only half a teaspoon to a tablespoon makes a big difference. Taste preferences are going to vary, and you can definitely overuse the umami. Next slide. More Italian bolognese sauce is what we made today. So good. Did you guys like that? Anyone there? Yeah? Good. Next slide.
Do you have recipes from like this morning?
Yes, they were outside of the room. Did anyone get them after the next guy? I told 3 different people to make sure that you got them.
They didn't tell the rest of us.
So they are available online though. All the recipes are free if you just Google. So these are all condiments too. And obviously I don't have the links to them, but they are condiments on my site. Ketchup, Thousand Island dressing, guacamole, brie. The brie is amazing. Going to be a Thanksgiving dish for my family. cheesy herb sauce, a mushroom gravy, marinara, the bolognese, pizza sauce, and a Dacca spice. Next slide. Okay, these are the boosters. So, roasted nuts and seeds we talked about. You can have those whole, chop them up, or grind them and add them like a powder. Avocado, delicious. You guys know avocado's like the butter of our world. Nutritional yeast we talked about. Does anyone not know how to use nutritional yeast?
Just sprinkle it.
Perfect.
Sprinkle it.
Just sprinkle it again and again.
Good on oatmeal.
Oh, yeah.
I put it on my oatmeal.
What was that? Now I'm going to show you. Oh, yeah. And actually, tamari is high in salt, so I don't really use tamari, coconut aminos, or the nayo shoyu. I don't use any of them. They make my hands hurt. I guess I'm really sensitive, but when you're not having salt and then you add salt in, it makes your joints hurt. It's inflammatory. And so tamari seems to bother me more than salt does. But I wonder if I experiment with some of the other options, maybe it wouldn't so much. Miso doesn't give me the same effect though. It doesn't give me pain. And Dr. Greger says that the fermentation of the miso actually negates the effect of salt on our diet, on our health.
I have probably an ignorant question about roasted nuts. If we roast the nuts and seeds, does that in any way decrease their basic nutritional value?
Yes, it does. Yes, and it's very important and very exciting. It's something I talk about a lot too. One sec, because I'm going to go deeper into that. Seaweed flakes.
I thought I meant to say decrease. Does it decrease?
Yeah, and I'm excited, and that's unusual, I know. But I'm going to tell you more. One second.
Mishu, what did you say about mishu? Dr. So-and-so said about mishu.
Oh, miso. Miso is fermented soybeans, and so it's healthy for us compared to other products that are high in salt. Okay, or healthier. And Dr. Clapper, who's was a doctor at True North Health Center, who's not using any salt in his diet, agrees with Dr. Greger. So I feel good about that.
When you get a moment, can you explain about the
I will, in just a moment. Seaweed flakes. So a lot of people aren't going to eat a lot of seaweeds unless you were raised with that. But seaweed flakes is a great way to start. You can train your taste buds to like it and just add a little bit on your dishes. Benson's Table Tasty is a salt-free seasoning, the best salt-free seasoning there is, but you can only get it on Amazon or their website, maybe Thrive Market.
What is it?
It's a salt-free seasoning made of herbs, spices, and vegetables, basically, all dehydrated down.
What's that name again, please?
Benson, B-E-N-S-O-N.
Thank you.
Benson's Table Tasty. Truffle zest also. So we don't want to use the truffle oil so much. You can really overdo it. Truffle zest, it has a little bit of salt in it, but it's a great way to get a lot of flavor, and tomato paste, just a little tomato paste makes a big difference too. Okay, next slide. So umami boosters make good quality food taste even better, but they're not going to fix your food. If it's bad food, if it's gone bad, it's not going to fix it. Same with the recipe. So you still got to learn how to cook. Next slide. So I think that we're wrapping up. This is, next slide. I think this is the end. Okay, perfect. So, because I want to go deeper. What time is it? We have,
Flip it over to summary.
okay, so I'll be quick. But I talk a lot about balancing flavor and nutrition, because what tastes the best isn't necessarily the most nutritious. Okay, because glutamine, I mentioned this other form of this compound, glutamine is actually more prevalent in raw vegetables, raw produce. You're destroying that glutamine when you take it in as the other form. So, glutamate. Yes, but glutamine, when you are having raw salads, you get more glutamine. And that is really healthy for us too. Our body needs all of it. And our body can convert one to the other really well as long as you're healthy and don't have any issues that might prevent that. But nuts, are more nutritious when they're raw, even more nutritious when they're soaked. But it's, what are you doing with it, and what do your taste buds say? You know, what are you going to eat the most of? And so day to day that changes. You know, I know sweet potatoes are healthier if I steam them. Roasting them actually degrades the nutrition of sweet potatoes. But if I'm, you know, having a bad day and that's my comfort food, I'm going to roast a whole bunch of sweet potatoes, and I'm going to save them, you know. Try to save them, don't eat them all at once.
Well, what about putting the nuts in a smoothie? Because I know that Dr. Greger says that if you put foods in a blender, that releases more nutrients.
Yes.
So
this is both of these are big topics and they're different.
Okay.
You release more nutrients, make them more bioavailable to you if you blend it first, but you're going to absorb it faster. So although you want to make sure you absorb all the micronutrients, you might be absorbing too many macronutrients in too short of a time. Meaning it's easier to gain weight, it's easier to overeat if you do a lot of blending. So it depends on someone's weight, where you are, and your food addiction tendencies. I am a huge food addict, which is why I didn't mention earlier, I am so big on the SOS-free lifestyle. But paying attention to the flavor and knowing how to get it in the healthiest way possible, knowing how to maximize your flavor using the whole foods, the whole plant foods, and then knowing how to make it the most nutritious is really important, knowing both of those for sustaining this and really optimizing your own health.
So do you soak your almonds always, but not your walnuts? Like walnuts is my favorite nuts.
It just depends on the day. I went through a phase when I went raw vegan before I went plant-based, and I soaked all my nuts. And it was like, these are gross flavored, the texture's all different, and then I loved them. And then I went back to, I was like, you know, McDougall was my first step back into plant-based, and he was like, you know, there's no point in soaking your nuts. And so I stopped being a lazy, just, you know, conserving energy.
It's more fattening if you have it whole or if you put it in a smoothie.
No, there's calories the same, but you can eat more if you put it in a smoothie. But what I was getting at is then I went back and tried them again, and you're constantly changing your taste buds. You know, just like you're learning with everything else, you're building habits, you can train your taste buds. I'm training my taste buds to like mushrooms right now. And it's actually going really well. I've been doing it all year, so I've been successful. But you have to get to know your body and your tendency. You know, if you're under eating, a lot of people as they age, they start to eat less. And so it might be more important to get umami then and to try to get a little more calories and blending. And
Like I never used salt.
oh yes, way over time.
I never used salt on anything, and so I developed this stuff really.
Okay, you'll have to talk to me afterwards. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you. Thank you.
I developed this real
Quick question.